In a big relief for home buyers, the government has finally amended the long-term capital gains tax regime for real estate. In fact, speaking just a few minutes ago in Sansad, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that it is the job of the Modi government to listen to the demands of taxpayers. Taxpayers can now choose between a lower tax rate of 12.5% without indexation or the higher rate of 20% with indexation for properties acquired before the date of presentation of the Union Budget, July 23, 2024. This change now enables individuals as well as Hindu undivided families to compute their taxes under both the schemes and pay the lower amount. This amendment was made through the Finance Bill 2024, offering substantial relief on long-term capital gains for immovable property. The flexibility provided in the grandfathering provision applies to all property transactions finalized before the budget presentation on July 23rd. The Union Budget 2024, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman made some major tax-related announcements. One of the key changes involved the removal of indexation benefits for real estate transactions and the reduction of LTCG from 20% to 12.5%. Now, what exactly is indexation? Indexation, a major bone of contention in the new LTCG, actually accounts for inflation by adjusting the purchase price of an asset, serves to lower gains and consequently decrease the individual's tax obligations. The uploaded regulations, which were announced recently, will come into effect on July 23, 2024. It's important to note that properties acquired before 2001 will continue to benefit from indexation. Now, this means that only recent acquisitions will be subjected to the new rules. So, if you complete any transaction before the mentioned date, then there will not be any impact by the way of new regulations. Remember, before the budget announcement of 2024, indexation benefits helped homeowners to increase the property's cost basis to account for inflation, thereby reducing the net profit and the associated tax liability. So what does all of this mean for you, the home buyer or the home seller or somebody who's in the middle of conducting a home ownership transaction? Joining us to decode all of this is Richa Sani, Chartered Accountant, Walker Chandiok and Company LLP. Richa, thank you for taking time out and being here with us this evening. Very simply put, there was a new LTCG introduced in the budget. Now there have been amendments to that. For the end user out there, somebody who's looking at acquiring a house or selling a house and buying another house, what does this really mean?
Yes, indeed. It's a big relief for homeowners, and in particular, it is the resident individuals and the HUFs which are going to get this relief in respect of the property that was acquired before these provisions were brought in form of a bill. That is, the cutoff date here is 23rd July 2024. So, but it's important here to note for individuals who are not directly holding the property but have used some form of a structure to hold the property. For example, there are cases where people hold properties through a company or an LLP. In that case, this benefit is not available. And considering this benefit has been given only to the resident individuals and HUFs, non-residents cannot take the benefit of this relief that has been provided. If you are a non-resident, then what you could think about is whether the tax treaty with the country where you're currently housed, it contains any non-discrimination clause, and whether you want to check that out basis, the stakes involved. So that is one thing that is there as far as the ambit of the people who are covered. Now, contrary to what is being said, it's not that the indexation has been reinstated. All that the FM is done is to ensure that the individuals and HUFs are not worse off under the new scheme or the new provisions just because they bought a property based on certain premise and based on certain aspects which they factored in at the time of purchase. How this will work is that you will first compute your tax liability under the new scheme Say, for instance, let me take an example. If a tax works out to be, say, 15 lakh in your case, in that situation, then the next thing that you need to do is compare the tax that would have been, that you were liable to pay under the old regime. Let us assume that it is 10 lakh. What this scheme now tells you is that you can ignore this additional 5 lakh rupees. So that is the crux and the substance of the scheme. Now, why I'm saying is that it's not that indexation has come back. The reason is I'll talk about two more scenarios. And these two more scenarios are situations, say in an instance, let's consider a case where on account of the indexation benefit, you have a situation of a loss, which means that there is nil tax payable. If you do a computation under the new provisions, you have a tax of, say, 5 lakh rupees. What the provision will enable you to do is, it will enable you to ignore that 5 lakh of tax and pay nil tax on that, but it will not permit you to carry forward the loss under the old regime, which would have been possible had the indexation benefit kept being reinstated in its full form. Similarly, if I take an example where you have loss in both the scenarios, you have a loss of, say, 15 lakh in a situation where you are doing an indexation benefit, and 10 lakh in a situation where you're doing not taking the indexation benefit. Under the existing law as it is proposed, you will not be able to carry forward 15 lakh. All you can carry forward is 10 lakh. And of course, for properties which are acquired after 23rd July, the new system will continue where there is no indexation benefit.
Okay, so this makes complete sense for somebody who is actually looking at transacting in the real estate space from an investment perspective, Richa. But consider the example of somebody who is, let's say, hypothetically, somebody who bought a house 10 years ago, 2014, and is looking at selling that house today to acquire another property. Does the taxation change in that case?
So, for each of these individuals, you will need to do a fact-based assessment. There could be several scenarios. The rollover provisions have not gone away. So, if you are somebody who had bought a house and you're planning to reinvest, there is Section 54 benefit which is available. And therefore, if the entire capital gains is invested in buying a new house, then there is no impact at all, even under the new regime, as was the case in the old regime. Okay. Now consider a situation where the new house that you propose to buy is more than 10 crore rupees. In that situation, since there is a cap on investment, therefore, if there is any capital gains beyond that 10 crore threshold, that is something where there will be still an exposure of capital gains. So it actually depends on how you're going to do that. And of course, if you are somebody who's planning to buy now, then going forward, what I would say is that if you hold the property for a shorter duration, then maybe your taxation is going to be less. The longer duration you hold it, there might be a higher taxation if you still were to compare it with the earlier regime. And of course, where the property was situated. We have seen recently, there was some data released that maybe Mumbai and NCR, they rank 3rd and 5th in terms of the rate in which property prices have risen. There are other reports which say that some of the 2-tier and the 3-tier cities, they are going to have exponential increase in the property prices in the coming years because of the infrastructure developments that are happening there.
Right.
So if that is the case, going forward, the indexation is not going to be available. So that is something you've got to factor in.
All right. And CBDT has also given some clarifications, Richa, and it has done this sort of, calculation, a cost-benefit analysis of old versus new LTCG regime. And it says that if you have purchased a property, you've held it for a period of 4 to 5 years, and the appreciation in that property has been up to 16%, between 12 to 16%. And if inflation has been in the range of about 4 to 5%, then the old structure may be beneficial, or rather, in fact, that is when the new structure is likely to be beneficial. But we know for a fact that inflation has been much higher than 4 to 5%.
Absolutely.
And appreciation actually on real estate seldom goes into double digits when the CAGR on an annualized basis is considered. So, and then another scenario of the benefit of the new structure happens to be if you've held a piece of property for more than 5 years and it has given you 1.7x returns, which is about 70% return. And the third scenario being that the new tax regime will be beneficial if you've got a property that you've held for 10 years and it has appreciated 2.4 times or 240% appreciation. Are these realistic scenarios looking at the overall real estate boom in India? And does it really stand to, to benefit people, who have actually made those sort of returns on real estate?
Very frankly, I'm sure the whole data has been done in a very well-meaning way, and all these factors have been considered, but these case scenarios are actually not available in public domain. What scenarios that we have actually encountered is that, in many cases, this may not actually work out. So I'm sure that there are certain assumptions which have been made behind this particular data, which is not really there in public domain. So from a layman perspective, and whatever analysis seems to be there done by taxpayers, I think that you would still need to do a case by case analysis and see how things pan out for you.
So eventually, Richa, I mean, up until 23rd July 2024, the presentation of the union budget, the fact that somebody who has already transacted or is likely to transact on a piece of real estate which he or she owned before the 23rd of July, any transaction on that happens to be optional in terms of the tax regime that you want to choose. But the point really is, what was the need for the government to introduce such a complex structure and then amend it? Who stands to benefit or who stands to lose by way of these amendments which have now been introduced by the government?
See, if you see that...
Simple question being, is it the government making more money with the new regime or the eventual taxpayer actually standing to win? Who eventually becomes the winner in this situation?
If I were to look at some numbers which were released by the government recently, so the center has raised around 2.78 lakh crore from long-term capital gains in the past 5 years. Now, if you look at the positioning of these proposals, it was, when the finance minister moved to the revenue generating part of things. There was a lot of, in every budget, when you give certain reliefs, there are certain measures that you need to take to garner that much resources also to take care of the expenses that are there. So this was basically covered in those category of the proposals. So, as I said, it's been done in a well-meaning way by the government, but it requires a case-specific analysis for all individuals to assess whether at all you gain. It depends on where your property is located, whether there is an appreciation, if at all, then, whether it exceeds, the way the data as by the government has been shared. So all those have to be factored in. And I would say that, past 2 weeks, we've seen all sort of recommendations being made to the government. There were cases, there were recommendations on having 2 regimes run parallelly, and the taxpayers could pick and choose. There were provisions, there were recommendations that you do grandfathering in the true sense of the word, where even the losses could be carried forward. There were recommendations that FMV of 2001 could be moved up, say, to 2021, and this could be periodically hiked. And the other was that you defer these provisions for a few years so that people could do whatever they wanted to do with the earlier properties. What the government has done is they've just kind of picked and chosen what they felt was the best suited for this relief.
All right, so the government seems to have chosen what best suits the taxpayer. Well, Richa Sahni, thank you so much for joining us. And you, our viewers, if you're in the middle of a transaction relating to real estate or property ownership, this would be a good time to speak to a chartered accountant. We'll slip into a very short break. On the other side, what's happening with Bangladesh's economy? Coming up after this very short break.
खेल में अब खेला होगा, हर नहले पे दहला होगा। ड्रीम बड़ा है, स्टेज बड़ा है, पूरा भारत साथ खड़ा है। We are the Tigers, साथ खड़ा है। We are the Tigers, गेम बड़ा है। Dribble like a rap, pass, 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 setting up the track, kick it hard in the booth, chuck, there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball.
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Hey, disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk as per your capacity and knowledge. Trade in options very carefully.
Wow, Dikra! Absolutely perfect. Take risk with full understanding.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News 9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Welcome back. You're with News 9 Live. I'm Karthik Malhotra. Bangladesh is facing the worst political crisis since its independence in 1971 after the resignation and eventual fleeing of Sheikh Hasina. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus is set to take on as the leader of Bangladesh's interim army-led government. Today we discuss the economic fallout of Bangladesh's turmoil. The country has faced persistently high inflation, close to 10% in recent months. Its garment workers have been protesting for better wages and improved working conditions, and the quota system that the students stood up against have arguably left many qualified youth unemployed. Once a rising tiger of Asia, the recent turn of events in Bangladesh have upped the country risk, and global rands making in Bangladesh are exploring other options to switch to. Remember, Bangladesh is the world's second largest exporter of ready-made garments after China. Fast fashion retailers like H&M, Levi Strauss and Zara heavily export from the country. As per the International Monetary Fund estimates, the textile sector accounted for almost 90% of the country's $55 billion of annual exports in the gone-by financial year 2024. Will Bangladesh emerge from this political mess? And is there an opportunity perhaps for India to step in and move up the textile manufacturing value chain? Well, joining me to throw more light on the political and the economic fallout in Bangladesh is Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates. Mithali, good evening. Thank you so much for taking time out. Help us understand what is the economic fallout of the political turmoil in Bangladesh?
So firstly, Karthik, I just want to say that, I'm personally just hoping and praying for peace to be restored in Bangladesh. I mean, it's one of my favorite countries. It's a, city, Dhaka, where people receive you with so much warmth and love. And, what is happening today with the innocent citizens, we can just hope and pray that peace returns as soon as possible. So I think that's the first thing. Now, when we look at the economic situation, right, Bangladesh was poised to move out of LDC status. Now, what does LDC status means? It means the status of a least developed country. And it was actually going to move into a developing country or emerging economy status. And the situation was such that, the garment industry had helped Bangladesh increase its per capita income to such an extent that at one point in time in 2022, we saw Bangladesh's per capita income exceed that of India.
That's right.
So, you
Bangladesh
know,
was standing at about $2,800 as per capita income at a time when India was still shy of $2,500. So you're right. I mean, as recently as 2022, it was poised to be Asia's next emerging tiger. Is it likely to come back ever to that position, at least in the foreseeable future, Mithali?
So I think, Karthik, right now all of the institutional frameworks which had been put in place to make this growth happen, and I of course interacted with a number of people in these, economic institutions, they have been shaken. And it will take some time for, peace to be restored, for order to be restored, for these economic measures to be restored. So I do think it will take some time, for Bangladesh to regain the pace at which it was growing. And also, I think somewhere the question becomes, can it really graduate out of LDC status given this political turmoil? So these are two very important aspects. But the other aspect which you spoke about, the textile industry being the backbone of Bangladesh's economy, is a very massive question mark now being put over there by global buyers whose value chains are now completely disrupted by this turn of events, who are asking that, where can we go to diversify? It's not about deserting Bangladesh, right? It's about making sure that your value chain as a buyer is resilient.
Absolutely.
So,
you want
at
to
the end of
mitigate
the
the
day-
country risk, and the country risk in Bangladesh right now is humongous, Mithali. So, I mean, just to jump to and really cut to the chase, what are the options available for textile brands across the world, fast fashion brands across the world? Where do they go if they don't want to continue relying heavily on China, which we've seen since the pandemic of 2019 onwards up until now? And if Bangladesh is also now falling economically, what are the options left? And is there really a case for India?
So there is a case for India, but I think that the bigger options are Vietnam and Cambodia. Because at the end of the day, Vietnam and Cambodia have very highly advanced manufacturing systems that are already in place. Even countries like Nicaragua and Thailand have massive textile manufacturing setups that are already in place. Of course, India is also well poised because we have the production linked incentive scheme in place for the textile industry.
That's right.
And we, of course, have a thriving textile sector of our own. We also have the advantage of a domestic market, which Thailand, Cambodia, and many of the other East Asian countries don't have as much of a domestic market as India does.
Right.
So I think there is a piece to be made for India, but I personally feel that the business will be split into smaller and smaller portions and go across several countries rather than going completely towards one country.
Right.
Even Sri Lanka, for example, is another option for global textile manufacturers, because now Sri Lanka is going back to normalcy in terms of its political situation. So
Right.
this is another option.
Right. Mithali, I have one final question for you, and this, as as somebody who has studied economics, as an economist yourself, and as a student of economics and statistics. Mohammed Yunus now coming as the leader of the interim government. What are the top three priorities, apart from, of course, restoring peace, which I think has to be top of mind, top of agenda for anybody who falls in that position right now? What should be the top three economic priorities for Mohammed Yunus?
I think one of the areas that he will surely focus on is inequality, because if you look at his economics and if you look at the entire narrative around the microfinance movement and around empowering, the poor to sort of take their own financial and economic decisions, is rooted in the framework of reducing income inequality. So I do expect that that will be one of the areas he will focus on, particularly through fiscal measures.
Okay.
And other two areas which I expect, one will of course be infrastructure development, because I think infrastructure is something where, urban infrastructure, climate resilient infrastructure, roads infrastructure, this is something Bangladesh has always been focused on and needs to continue to be focused on.
Okay.
And then the last aspect is really around women empowerment. I mean, Bangladesh is one country where we've seen the strongest of women being in the forefront, being in the labor force. And I think Professor Mohammed Yunus will definitely continue that trajectory.
All right, Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. And unfortunately with that, we've completely run out of time right here on News 9 Live. But of course, news and updates continue after this very short break. Thanks so much for watching.
lived up to their pre-tournament billing, delivering a series of less than convincing performances. With 2 draws and a solitary win.
Your son will be Messi. No studies, just football all day. Go, my son, go. Make my face shine through playing football.
Not only your face, but also the country's. I will